and considers smart cities to be a major focus area for the next decade. We are working locally and globally with major stakeholders in the smart city ecosystem, which gives us a unique point of view on the forces that drive the future of cities. Learning from our experience so far, there are a few elements we must consider while trying to promote the ecosystem, and I would like to share 3 of them with you. First, let's learn from the business sector. Think about similarities between cities and businesses. Businesses have customers, and cities have citizens, and both need to keep them happy. They both work under continuous economic pressure. Businesses suffer from lower profitability margins, just as city municipalities suffer from budget constraints. Following this logic, in the same way that private and public sectors are being disrupted by innovation, so too cities are needing to adjust to the digital age and undergo their own digital transformation processes. Second, consider the citizen as the end goal and as an asset. In classic digital transformation plays, we put the client in the center. In return, he serves as a source for valuable data and engagement. In cities, we must remember the immense value each citizen provides in helping us achieve our goal. The concept of treating our citizens as customers and as sensors could be very, very valuable. Last but not least, create an adjusted risk-taking approach. The public sector must internalize aspects of VC approach in order to embrace innovation. Every VC knows that some investment will have great success, other a moderate success, and some will completely fail. It is not realistic to expect that an investment manager in a VC will hit a home run on each and every one of his portfolio companies. So, if we apply the same logic here, we cannot expect that every smart city initiative will succeed. But we do want to learn how to fail fast and cheaply. At Deloitte, we are involved in many exciting smart city initiatives. We work locally and globally to help governments, cities, tech companies, and startups plan and execute major plays in the field. Deloitte's Innovation Tech Terminal, Adar and the others are sitting here in the front, is a collaboration between Deloitte's US and Israeli practices and has a physical presence in both the US and Israel. The ITT, the Innovation Tech Terminal, serves both our global clients, which comprises 80% of global Fortune 500 companies, and the Israeli startup ecosystem. With our global clients, ITT focuses on curating innovation and facilitating relationships with the Israeli startup ecosystem by providing clients with immersion labs, scouting services into the Israeli technology innovation. With our startup clients, the ITT provides unique value-added services to the local ecosystem throughout the entire entrepreneurial life cycle, offering audit, tax, risk management, financial advisory, and business consulting services. With that in mind, I would like to thank our partners in this great event, EcoMotion and ZenCity, and of course, Mr. Stefan Goldsmith, for honoring us by spending the next hour sharing his vast knowledge with us. Now I would like to introduce to the stage Orly Daan, Executive Director at EcoMotion.
Good evening, everyone. So happy to be here. I would like to start by thanking BAL for this amazing space. BAL is a co-working space for all sizes. And if you want to join all this beauty, we have BALers here, we have here in the back, and they love to help you. Our dad's here, thank you. I would like to second that thank you to Deloitte and to ZenCity. Deloitte, we just talked about it. Every time, it's like a recipe made for success. So when you put good ingredients together, it always comes out good. And it's amazing to see you all today here. And ZenCity, which started as a group out of one of the first biggest collaborations of EcoMotion and Intelligent Municipality in a hackathon. And there is power in the hackathons. There you go. Today's ZenCity, one of the most globally recognized Israeli startups, I feel, especially in this space of urban city, smart city. A little bit about us, if you don't know EcoMotion. EcoMotion is a joint venture of a private NGO called the Israel Innovation Institute that has the vision of implementing innovation here in Israel. And to do so, we partnered with the government with the Fuel Choice and Smart Mobility Initiative under the Prime Minister's office and the Ministry of Economy. A lot of partners, a lot of good. We started in 2012, and today we have over 600 startups and 7,000 community members in the field of smart transportation. And then you ask yourself, smart transportation, smart city data, what does all this mean? But now, as much as we go forward, we understand that everything starts with data. Everything. We're starting now with this big new goal of implementing innovation in smart transportation. And to do so, we started a course with municipalities, taking leaders in the transportation space in municipalities, bringing them together and doing an innovation course called Smart Transportation Now. We're not talking about the future anymore. We need to start implementing this innovation. And the first course of this lesson was about data. Don't go out there starting to do all of these big plans, offering new mobility services, and if that's great, but make sure that you're answering the needs of the city. And the only way to know that is by first understanding who is living in your city, where are they living, where they're working, what are they doing. And I am really, really happy for this day, and I am very much looking forward to hear Steve talk about this, because this is one of the most important things, and this is the starting point. This is the fundamental stones of everything. And to say no further, I would love to invite Eyal Feder, the founder of ZenCity, to share his knowledge and to say a few words, and also to invite Stefan Goldsmith up. So thank you so much. Enjoy. I know I will. And good luck.
Thank you so much, Oli. And first of all, I'm very, very excited to be here. Thank you so much to our partners, to Deloitte and to EcoMotion, to be all for this amazing event. And in just a few minutes, I'll stop taking up your time and introduce the great speaker that we have for tonight. But just a few words about us, about ZenCity. As already said, we started just a few short years ago as a group participating in a hackathon of Tel Aviv Municipality and EcoMotion. And today I'm happy to say that we serve over 4 million citizens around the world, in Israel and in the US, working with local governments to help them understand their citizens' needs on a wide scale. Our data from a variety of sources, like social media, like city hotlines, 106 in Israel or 311 in the US, like many, many other places where people share their thoughts, feelings, insights, requests, and needs about the city, and we analyze them automatically with advanced AI to help city managers, mayors, and decision makers make better decisions and better manage their city. Our team has been working very hard on our growth, and I'm happy to say that, as I said, we work with over 25 cities, which represent a few million citizens in population, and we hope to grow a lot more over the next few years. And to do that, we're hiring people for almost all positions right now. So if anyone is interested, find me or anybody else that has a ZenCity sticker on them later tonight, and feel free to talk to us about the possibilities of working at ZenCity. So that was my shameless plug, and now I'll move on to introduce a speaker that I'm a huge fan of. When we talked before, he said that he does boring stuff, like make the garbage get picked up more often. And the speaker that we have tonight, that I'm very honored to be introducing, is Professor Stephen Goldsmith. Professor Goldsmith, if you don't know, is a professor of government and the director of the Innovation in Government program at Harvard's Kennedy School. He's also the former mayor of Indianapolis and the former deputy mayor of New York City. In his term in those two cities, he's made significant changes to the way that they are managed and to the prosperity and the day-to-day life of their citizens. As a professor at Harvard, he wrote 2 books, the first of which was very, very, very influential on me and on my thinking in the space of smart cities, of urban innovation, and in many ways brought the ideas and the thoughts that we brought to life within ZenCity. The new book that he just had out a few months ago is called A New City OS, A New City Operating System. And what I want to say about it is to be, shamelessly quoting someone else that I really, really, really appreciated, Ms. Jennifer Palka, who's the founder and executive director of Code for America, the biggest civic tech organization in the US. She said about Professor Goldsmith's latest book the following: Goldsmith and Kleinman illuminate an effort critical to the future of our country, a major reframing of public sector operations to make them work for and with the American public. The case studies they chronicle here, the lessons they derive, and their guidance for the future will help any change agent get us to the new operating system our local governments so desperately needs. And I think that relates a lot to what a lot of us passionate about urban innovation are trying to do, and what we at ZenCity are trying to do. And with that, I'll say, go buy the book, and come on, Professor Boltzmann.
Thank you to ZenCity and Deloitte and Vial. It's very confusing. I've been coming to Israel for 30 years and I've never found this many people listening to me ever. I've been in groups of this size, but they've all been talking. I've never heard them all listening to me. So it's very exciting. And I appreciate the plug for my book, which is right there. Can be found on Amazon. So much for the plugs. What I want to do, I can't step around here, I'll step in front of the slideshow. So I want to spend a little while talking about how the digital age is changing the way cities work, but concentrating on it a little different way, which is kind of, I've spent the last 30 years in local government, but over the last year and a half I've spent time visiting virtually every major U.S. city. I run programs for mayors in the U.S. and chiefs of staff and chief data officers, and I found increasingly that the exciting accomplishments of digital transformation are generally not integrated completely into city government. They're kind of workarounds, like we've done something innovative with a new technology despite the problems of government. So I want to kind of categorize the changes I've seen and suggest the ways I think government should change to take advantage of the digital tools. And things are changing quite quickly. I was deputy mayor of operations for Mike Bloomberg, stopped probably about 5 or 6 years ago. The technology changes since that time alone are very few kind of cities have adopted what could be done. So let's start with kind of this for a second. So I'm fundamentally what I want to talk about is kind of what would a distributed system of governance look like as contrasted to government we have today. What would happen if we moved from a system that was agency-oriented to one that was citizen-oriented? What would happen if we went from systems that were really based on pieces of paper that were sequential to situations where acting in time really makes a difference? You know, what happens if we change the definition of professionalism for public servants? And what if we move from a system that goes away from compliance as the definition of success to one that looks at outcomes? So let me go through those quickly. Now this is boring to all of you because those of you who are entrepreneurs design systems that are fundamentally arranged around the user's experience, right? That's, you know, I'm going to use the app in my phone if it fits the experience that I want, right? If the user interface is what I want. But government's not set up that way, right? Government's set up around the needs of the agency, around the needs of the bureaucrat. And I don't mean the bureaucrat in a pejorative sense, I mean the bureaucrat as a person who works in a bureau. And the definition of efficiency often is efficiency in that bureau. But what if we thought about how to rearrange government around the user's experience? Well, what would that mean? It would obviously mean putting the citizen at the center. And this is just some of the things going on that many of you are doing and are going and happening in the U.S. today. But together, look at making the citizen the center, right? They use behavioral economics and nudge theory to kind of cause citizens to act in a certain way. The campaigns are designed with user-centered campaigns. You know, all of us that are buying anything, right, in the retail world are used to retailers that are omni-channel retailers, right? I'm a customer. I can decide whether to walk into the store or I can purchase my athletic shoes on a mobile app, or I can use my computer, right? But in government, right, how often does government organize omni-channel choices for its residents, giving the residents the decision about where they want to go to accomplish their work? Or structured feedback, right? How do we learn as a government from our user experience, and how does that play in the 311 platforms? Now, just to make some comments around the obvious, right? So, the open data movement is pretty pronounced in the U.S. today and along the way in Israel to some extent. But you know, when I was deputy mayor of New York many years ago, right? New York had one of the earliest ordinances on open data. But here's what happened, right? The early ordinances on open data, the agencies said, I'm going to put some of my data up on and call it open. I don't care how ugly they are as PDFs or Excel spreadsheets. I'm going to check the box, say my data is open, and move on to the next issue that's to me more important, right? But open data is really not open if it's not well visualized. And this is just an example from one of the more interesting U.S. ones, where this is Pittsburgh, right? And Pittsburgh decided it was going to make a campaign of its open data. It was going to create little icon penguins. It was going to create a team that would educate the neighborhood groups. It was going to make sure that its open data was well visualized and mapped, and then its data became more usable. So this, just to begin, as we think about the user experience, let's think about visualization. Or Indianapolis, not when I was there, but more recently, so everybody can redesign a website. But what Indianapolis did was said, okay, if the apps on the website are badly designed and not easily used by the resident, it doesn't make any difference how pretty the front door is, right? So if you come into the application and the application is ugly and unusable, so they began to examine, right, what were the design elements in the application in the website that increased the take-up rate for residents, right? Why were older African-American citizens not filing for the benefits they could get in the same rates as wealthier white residents? And it had a lot to do with the design of the website. So these are all just to say, if you had a new operating system and you were thinking as a technologist about providing services, then you would look about how that would happen. And similarly, what is this kind of new definition of professionalism? So let me just kind of back up to the first part of the story for a second, which is true in both New York City and actually Tel Aviv, right? So New York City has a very advanced civil service system. And essentially, here's what we did with government. Some of you may have heard of Tammany Hall and the early corruption in New York City 125 years ago. So in order to stop corruption in government, then a number of reforms occurred. And these reforms made it difficult for government officials to abuse their discretion by making sure that they had no discretion to abuse, right? So if you were bad and wanted to give contracts to your friends or whatever, it was difficult to be bad. But if you were a really good public employee, it was impossible to be good because everybody was into rule compliance. And so the definition of professionalism was how well did you comply with the rules? Not how well did you listen to your citizens, not how much did you produce outcomes, but it was a compliance-based system. And so as we talk a little bit about it, that this represents to me a new definition of professionalism. How do we have distributed governance? How do we listen to what our community says? How do we incorporate that through various systems into the planning process? So as we think about the interaction between the community and the residents, and we're back to visualization. So this is just for example, this is San Francisco Bay Area. And one of the leading issues in the Bay Area is economic inequality, right? They have some of the greatest differences in the U.S. And so how does the city make that conversation come alive for purposes of collaboration? Well, it maps it and it visualizes it. And of course, this is just a PowerPoint, but each one of these dots can actually be brought alive with what's the income in that community, what's happened to the income of that community, why is this community one color and that community another color. And so I just suggest that if we continue to think about the new definition of professionalism, it's one that says, let's think about how to visualize the information and listen. And here's another way to say it. This is from Washington, D.C. A couple mayors ago. So how do we capture information from residents, and what do we do with it? Well, some residents are noisy and they make their way to City Hall regardless. But how about the folks who just don't have a smartphone, they have an older phone, and they go into an agency and they're mistreated by a public official, right? What responsibility does government have to reach out to them and ask them for input? So this is just a scorecard that the mayor of Washington, D.C. said, and their big signpost when you leave the bureau saying, text us back, were you treated well? Text us back your level of satisfaction. But that's not enough, right? That has to be incorporated into a scorecard that the mayor uses to manage the agencies. Because if people tweet or text back and nothing happens, obviously, it's not a very good management system. This just reflects how DC incorporated those management scores in what they did. Now, as we think about this whole idea of citizen engagement, this is Philadelphia, and this is a planning tool that's available to every community group. So, if it doesn't make you dizzy, it'll stop in a second. Okay, so here's the definition of community engagement when I was mayor of Indianapolis. I'm exaggerating a little bit since we're streaming this, but city officials have plans, the planning departments have plans, but then they go to community meetings, and during those community meetings, people stand up and yell about how bad their plans are, in part because they don't really understand them, and then the city officials go back and do what they were going to do anyway, right? So it's not actually like an engaged conversation. So if you want to engage the public, you might use these 3D augmented reality tools that say, okay, you want to have a conversation about this zoning of this building? Then here's a tool that anybody can use to say, if you turn the building this way, if you mass it this way, on July 15th at noon, what will the shadows be? What will the shadows be on December 1st? What will they do to the park, right? So if we want to have a real conversation, we ought to give the community those tools, and then we ought to listen to the community as they engage, and the rapid expansion of augmented reality for purposes of planning is one way to think about it. Now let me just switch. So that's the first bucket, right, which is user experience. So let's go to the second bucket, which is acting in time. So government, because it's paper-based and because it's government, often doesn't really pay much attention to how long it takes to accomplish an activity, right? So, when I was mayor, deputy mayor of New York, restaurant licensing and other permits reported to me, and if you were a small restaurant entrepreneur, you were lucky to get your 12th permit giving you the right to open before you ran out of money, right? Just almost perfectly timed. And by the time you got to the finish line 13 months later, you would be pretty low on dollars. So how do we act in time? Well, there are various ways to act in time. One, which many of you are involved in today, is to say one way to act in time is that we ought to listen to things connected to IoT networks that tell us when they're going to break before they break so that they can be repaired in real time. I mean, what is it about the way government operates that requires something actually to break, a person to get mad and call City Hall before City Hall repairs it, right? This is just from San Diego when they changed their parking meters to an obvious example for a parking meter that has a sensor in it. The sensor relays when it has a problem or when it goes down. The same is true of Chicago waterfront, right? Instead of waiting for somebody to get sick in the waterfront because of a bacterial problem, the sensors in the waterfront now are visualized in real time, available to the public, and alert both the public and City Hall. So how do you act in time? When you get warnings of issues before they become problems rather than reacting after they become problems. This whole sensor world, whether it's sensors in water pipes, sensors in the water, sensors in the street lights, sensors in fill in the blank, right? Bridges will dramatically change the way that cities operate, and Chicago is a leader in the U.S. in this regard. Similarly, this is an air sensor in Chicago. So let's think about how we move to the next level, which is, can we connect the quality of air in certain neighborhoods to public health, right? Are there certain circumstances in different communities that we can sense and connect to the air quality sensors that are now in Chicago? So, and then if you think about it more broadly, that the greatest number of sensors walking around a city are people, right? Every person is a sensor, and this is one of the earliest examples that many of you are aware of, which is Boston was really the first U.S. city to have Android and Apple apps that allowed a citizen to take a picture and instead of reporting a problem, they would geo-stamp and photograph the problem and send it in, which allowed the city worker to get the picture, which allowed the city worker to fill the pothole and fix the problem, which then allowed the city worker in some circumstances to text back to the person who reported the problem in the first place, saying, you know, I'm Joe, I just fixed your problem, right? So we have a kind of a virtuous loop of solutions there as well. And then in the same regard, right, if we think about a really smart city, I mean, do we really need to wait for this bus to break before we do the preventative maintenance? There are 100 sensors on this bus. We know how hot the whole oil is, right? We know how fast the transmission is going. We know how long the doors are open, right? We have massive amounts of information from similarly situated buses. Why not kind of predict what are the outliers in this situation as well? And similarly, you know, this is Detroit. Detroit has a lot of blight. There's only so many housing inspectors in Detroit. How do you solve the problem? Well, you ask every citizen who sees blight, who cares about it, to upload a photo of that building and then map it, which is this map that's over here in the corner. Those red dots are not from housing inspectors, they're from citizens reporting blight, right? So now we're engaging the public to help solve problems, not just thinking about the public as complainers. And so this is obviously just an airport security situation, but I just want to raise the following question. How about the way we regulate? I mean, why is it that we regulate every building as if they're all the same, right? If we can fast track individuals coming into or out of the country based on evaluating their risks, why don't we use data to evaluate who the good actors are from the bad actors, who the good contractors are from the bad contractors? So in Atlanta doing this, they changed the permit process for houses from 6 months to 30 minutes, right? Because they could identify those things that were relatively straightforward with good actors and moving forward. And similarly, you can do the same thing with restaurants. You can do this in any area of government, right? Which is say, I'm going to predict where a problem is going to be, and I'm going to preempt that problem. So this is just San Francisco and Chicago saying, if we mine the Yelp data, we listen to the social media, we can more quickly identify what restaurants are making people sick than depending on our inspectors to find it, right? Because there's more people eating than there are inspectors, right? And we just have to listen to what they say and solve the problem. And so just to kind of summarize a few points, here are, I think, the basic building blocks, right? Obviously, you go from paper to digital. I had this conversation. I'm trying to restrain myself a little because I'm being screamed at. But I had this conversation once with, when I worked at City Hall, and for Mayor Bloomberg, City Hall was a big open facility. And he sat here, and I sat here, and a bunch of people sat around. So I turned around one day and said, the most innovative idea you'll ever hear. And he goes, okay, what? I said, we're going to eliminate paper at City Hall. And he said, kind of, is that really the best you can come up with, right? And so for a while I was unsure of myself, but I think it is the best thing I can come up with, because if you want, the only way to kind of move from sequential systems to concurrent systems, to move from kind of bureaucracy to data on which you can manage, is to eliminate the paper. The next thing is to go from task-based to predictive and targeted interventions. Right? So the big obvious takeaway is that government operates in a routine fashion. And that doesn't make any sense. It needs to readjust and use its resources for outliers. And you know, the frequently written about example that we did back then, it's just an example, is I was sitting in City Hall, we got a report that a family of 4 or 5 died in a fire. And so I was worried about what we should have done to prevent it. I called the buildings department and said, have you ever had a complaint about that building? And they said, yes. But we also get 40 or 50,000 other complaints a year, and we're doing our best. We're knocking on the door once. I called the fire department, asked the same question, and I got the same answer, which is we have tens of thousands of complaints, and we're doing our best. Then there was a data guy in the back of City Hall who said, just wait a minute, just give me 60 days, and I'll come back with some suggestions. And he took property tax records, code enforcement records, police report records, mortgage delinquency records, and came back and said, I can improve the predictability of which complaint is going to lead to a fire by 1,000%, right? And so then we created teams of a fire inspector and public and a building inspector and sent them to 300 buildings most likely to have a fire, right? So you can do that with food, you can do that with buildings. The point is that we now have the opportunity, if we move from these compliance and routine systems, reactive systems, targeted interventions, to redirect public resources towards field work employees who have the data and can actually intervene with decision support systems. And this is just a little example, right? So this is the most advanced place in the U.S. is Allegheny County in Pittsburgh, which is we used to send still do in most places in the U.S., badly prepared young workers into vulnerable homes to decide whether to remove a child, right? Toughest job in government. And they may have a clipboard with pieces of paper, and then now they may have tablets with the digitized information, but that's still not very helpful. The issue here is, how do you create a data warehouse and data analytics that take all the information from places that touch that child, school, health, and other resources, deliver it to the welfare worker who's in the home with a decision support system that tells her what types of questions to ask in what circumstances, right? Decision support systems. So now we've dramatically changed the way that government operates, and the worker now goes from commodity work to informed work. And this is probably the most sophisticated example in the U.S., which is NYPD. Billions of records, literally billions of records. They're not useful at all to the street cop unless they can be presented to the street cop in a way that he or she can act on them. And they take all of this information, send it to the officer's smartphone, configured in very easy icons around what's happening in his precinct, right? A car has crossed this bridge that is wanted for a crime, and it will be in your precinct in 3 minutes, right? So, or fill in the blank, right? So I just use this because the goal of data is to create domain awareness, which is Domain Awareness System, DAS, to help the officer make a decision. That's what the whole thing is about, right? Predictive interventions, using the information to get better. And so as we go to the last area, I would just say the following, whole process of bureaucracy, this compliance-based bureaucracy, says we send out folks into the field, they make decisions, and supervisors try to figure out whether they make good decisions or not. But now maybe we should think about sentiment analysis. Maybe we should evaluate what their case notes are. Maybe we should try to find more information from the data about how they make decisions. Maybe we should measure the time it takes to make those decisions. Now, and then as many of you are working on these things today, the ultimate way to think about this is that there is an enormous amount of work done by government employees that ought to be outsourced to machines, right? It's just commodity work, and that doesn't mean we need to lay off those public officials. It means we need to give them the time to apply that new freed up time to actually helping people make decisions. I mean, the easiest way to think about this is New York City 911, 30 million calls a year. 60% of those calls are information calls like, do I have to move my car from the left side of the street to the right side of the street for street cleaning today? They're answered by employees, and they're repetitive questions. There's no reason why those questions can't be machine chatbot answered, and those employees then use their time to solve real problems that require them to kind of think about them. Just last to an issue that I know Deloitte's working on, you guys working on, but let me make a point about this because I think it's really very important, which is that the big benefit of big data is it allows us to think about things as systems and not as activities. So go back to my time in New York City. The Taxi Limousine Commission was one of my agencies. The MTA ran the subways, the Transportation Department ran streets and bikes, the TNCs, Ubers, and Lyfts came to New York City, and so there was somebody in charge of each one of those nodes. Right? But really, New York should have been in the business of thinking about how to manage mobility, how to move people in the community, how to get people who are underserved to the jobs they need. And so, with a great benefit of these data systems is it allows us to think about the system, whether it's a child welfare system or there's a mobility system. And maybe the city that's done the best of thinking about this broadly is Los Angeles, which has created a GeoHub, which says we're gonna geotag all of our open data so that we can then have agencies. If you're working one agency, you can see what another agency is doing at the same jurisdiction. If you're in a community, you can see how your community's cleanliness compares to another jurisdiction. So the way I've thought about it is that geotagging is the scaffold upon which people in city government and communities can work, right? Because the data becomes quite meaningful. As I said, LA is probably the most advanced in that. This is LA using a chatbot to multilingual answer so many of the questions that come to their call center. These are just all ways to increase citizen satisfaction and look at how to use systems across areas. So, this isn't a speech about these issues, but I don't want to ignore the fact that each one of these questions has security issues, and anonymity issues, and confidentiality issues, and all of those should be kind of documented and transparent in the city government. So let me just kind of stop in a second and answer your questions, but here's my pitch. We've operated government for the same way for 100 years. Obviously not Israel for 100 years, but we've operated government essentially for 100 years the exact same way, which is command and control and bureaucratic and civil service rules and employees who act in compliance. And maybe one example to think about this is that today, there used to be an assumption that you couldn't give employees discretion and hold them accountable. But today we can do that, right? We know where every inspector's been because his or her tablet is got a GIS in it, right? It has a ability to kind of monitor GPS and GIS where that person is, how long they've been there, who are the outliers. And so today we can give discretion to our employees. We can rearrange the way they work. We can solve problems preemptively. This is the most important time in the century, public administration generally, to change the way government works. And the tools are here, they're represented in the room, and the public sector just needs to kind of think of a different way to manage, and we can dramatically improve the satisfaction of our citizens. And particularly in democracies, right, the trust of citizens is important to the future of the democracy. These little user experience build up a reservoir of trust, which allow public officials to do even better things. So it's an honor to be able to talk in Tel Aviv, and particularly with a group that's this involved in this issue, and hopefully this will give you some ideas. Thank you very much. How are we doing on time? Questions? Yes. I don't know if you do question. You can just shout at me or something.
Did you address citizen participation as part of what you do? Because think of LA, for example, the rates are extremely low. So is this part of what you look at? And if so, how?
Citizen participation in. Yeah, I need to ask a question before I repeat the question, because I want to hear part of the question. So you mean participation in voting or participation? Well, so, yeah. Well, there's a number of ways. So the question, how about participation where democracy, where voting rates are low? So I think one of the reasons that they're low is people believe their participation is futile, right? Not just at the ballot box, but just in general in life. And so I think the extent to which government becomes responsive and personalizes their services and engages, to the extent to which we think about using not just smartphones, but SMS texting to create relationships to residents, to the extent to which we move to digital tools apart from voter registration, other things, we can increase the participation. But ultimately, I think that in municipal elections have the lowest voter turnout rates, right? But to the extent to which people think their government cares about them and is paying attention to them, I think that will improve the rate somewhat. Other questions? Yes.
So there are a lot of entrepreneurs in the room who are working on these issues, and then when they meet some of the investors on that side of the equation, we always worry about this as an initial market for them because of tenders and because of the speed at which cities consume innovation. Can you maybe address that? Do you see that changing? Obviously, there's a democratic reason behind tenders and a public policy reason behind it, but maybe we can discuss it.
The enemy of innovation, at least in the U.S., is procurement. When I had a 2-year leave from Harvard to be deputy mayor of New York, I began a big innovation on day one with the procurement. I could maybe get it done before my 2 years sabbatical. So this is a really serious issue. And some cities like Philadelphia, San Jose are looking at alternative procurement structures. Many cities are using now pilot contracting authority. It only helps you so long because once you have to pop over the top of the pilot. Co-op purchasing and the like is very helpful as well. But I think there's a great attention now in the U.S. to the fact that procurement has to change. It has to change because it slows the speed of innovation. It also has to change because, this is a little bit of exaggeration, not completely, which is that the procurement cycle lasts longer than the technology that you're procuring, right? So you're just really off. Now that, obviously, cloud systems and SaaS pricing have a lot, but just in short, I'd say pilot programs, co-op purchasing, purchasing off the master contracts, PSA and otherwise, but we're going to need a procurement reform in the U.S. because it's really, selling to cities and states and U.S. is really a torturous business. Yes, and then,
So could you comment on how this can improve, or how is it being used for participatory planning, urban transportation planning, budget planning, participation in that sense, not waiting for it.
right. Well, so there are some participatory budgeting successes. They're increasing. There's participatory budgeting effort and participatory budgeting organization. New York City has for some time used participatory budgeting for each city council has a set-aside budget for kind of social services, and many of them now put that up for kind of a democratic vote in their district about how to use that. Pretty advanced. There's obviously some of that in Latin America as well. So there's some participatory budgeting. It's not a big percentage of the budget, but it's significant. There is pretty dramatic change in some cities on planning. Boston Planning Department has done some very exciting things using augmented reality and mapping, virtual community meetings, dynamic planning, because the planning process has to start earlier and has to be better visualized. And I think that will be an area that we'll see some. And I just saw last week the Boston planning director showing me shadows on Boston Commons based on the number of stories in the building that she was supposed to permit, like 50 yards away. So that informs the conversation in a pretty exciting way. So I think we'll see more of that as well.
Transportation.
And, well, I think the problem with transportation is I think transportation has a bigger problem, which is that nobody's in charge of it, right? It's not a city issue, it's not a county issue, it's not a regional issue, it's not a bike issue, it's not a car issue, it's a mobility issue. And so I'm trying to now look at underserved populations in terms of jobs and open job clusters in the U.S. and then overlay transportation patterns and then figure out what the city's responsibility is and help them arrange that, right? Are they shared rides or what is it that closes that last mile gap? After we get that far, and then we can have some community participation in the planning. Right now, we don't even have planning, right, in most places. Try to get more optimistic answer to the next question.
Hi, thanks for your talk. You kind of touched upon this, but I'm interested to know if you have further tips or insights or principles of how city governments can ensure that it can ensure inclusivity with the use of tech. So ensuring that there's a high level of engagement among low-income populations or different type of ethnic populations, but also if you've come across examples where city government can encourage interaction and community building between people of different socioeconomic, racial, or ethnic backgrounds.
Right. The issue of inclusivity is a huge one in the U.S. today. So let me answer it a couple different ways. So this looks to be unrelated to your question, but I don't think it is as part one, which is these Link NYC, New York, which are driven by advertising, which is some cities accept and some don't, but provides free citywide gigabit wireless service, which is a big deal because a lot more people have smartphones than have smartphone data plans, right? So one way to think about inclusivity is what's the city's role with availability of high-speed broadband. That's not quite what you asked, but it's connected. The second is that I think the city in the LA Geo Hub, I won't try to make you dizzy by finding it, the LA Geo Hub, when they started to rate cleanliness by neighborhood, they visualized the differences in city services. Now that was in part driven by the LA Times, but Mayor Garcetti immediately responded to that and corrected the problem. He corrected the problem because the visualization of the data showed the inequity in the delivery of city services. So that was also the reason I put that Bay Area map up there, because data visualized tells a story, and stories motivate public action. So what's the public narrative that the data says? Third, I think that the cities don't do much of this, but they should organize response systems with SMS texting to underserved communities. Was your workforce training helpful? Was your after-school reading program productive for your son? Right? So that we need to kind of design these reach-out programs. There's a company in the U.S. texting that was involved in trying to get texts back from citizens. So now, lastly, your question deserves like a 5-hour answer. So, definitely not easier than the other question. So the other issue, I think, is how do we use data to make people in the community understand the context of other folks, right? Because they don't, if you're segregated by neighborhood, I don't mean legally segregated, but you're segregated by neighborhood and work or transportation, then we need to create a sense of community, and the data visualized needs to present that sense of community, and the inequities need to be visualized, and the opportunities need to be visualized. And so starting discussions that are well informed, and particularly in the U.S. where there's some questions about the facts of media, right? The local government has I would say that within a political charge to it. I assume there's this argument about obviously false news from both sides, but the local government has responsibility and opportunity to actually inform its public with real information well visualized and help build the civic infrastructure despite the kind of national performance of the east of the U.S. Yes.
I'd like to ask about separating chaff by fake news. For example, I've recently read the Koch brothers are trying to undermine free public transit in various states in the U.S. and are spending money lobbying with lobbyists and pressure groups. How can the public differentiate in the right way between such efforts that are harming the public good and then fake news, etc.? How do we work against this?
Let me answer this question. The next question will be done.
I have one question.
It's your place. Just a second. I'm going to try to avoid this question. But pretend to answer it. This is a fake news question, which I walked into by answering the other question, which I don't really want to answer at all, because I'm just a local official, right? So, I, however, think. Let me just talk about the U.S. not Israel, obviously. The trust in government is down, but not trust in local government, which is stayed about the same. It's not going up, but it hasn't gone down very much. So people have more trust in officials they're closer to. And I think that trust is augmented when government's responsive, like they've solved the problem, they paid attention. And in that regard, I think your question and this latest question go together, because government has an opportunity then to tell stories, right? To visualize the data. Whether that's school performance or whatever the case may be. And so I think that the responsibility of local officials now, because of this argument about what news can we trust at the national level, is greater than ever before. And as communities get more polarized, local government has a responsibility to kind of try to build a social fabric, and that social fabric comes from well-communicated information. And I, the new New York City call center information 311 and Chicago 311, New York City and Chicago, will allow personalized outbound information. You can create a personalized, like an Amazon account with your city government, which allows you then to register for certain information. I just think it creates kind of a responsiveness. Yes, sir. Stop here. I don't know how long I'm allowed to go. Yes.
So the cycle of
just a little louder.
Okay. The way the cycle works with open data being analyzed by external companies and then used back by the government creates kind of a tension when the data is open, the analysis is not necessarily open, but then the policy needs to be based on a process that lies outside. Do you think cities should demand transparency from governments, from companies that are analyzing data that they'll be using later?
Should have known this would not be a normal audience. Each question is kind of worse than the question before it. So this is such a complex question. So I've done a lot of work in public-private partnerships. Inherently in the issue of public-private partnerships is what is the public control and what's the private sector control? Who sets the terms and how do those terms work? And even as cities in the U.S., I run a group of chief data officers from 25 cities. U.S. cities are getting more sophisticated about data, but they're not nearly as sophisticated as the private companies they engage, just because the companies are bigger and they have more money and broader reach. So now you can track with the company. The company prepares it, takes the city data, prepares an algorithm that helps, and then the city then makes a decision. And you can think about policing as kind of the most pronounced of these. And then how do you know that the algorithm, how do you know whether the algorithm is solving the bias problem or perpetuating or magnifying it? And so I think that and New York City has a commission now trying to think up rules for this. I think it's going to be very difficult to solve because the city needs to have the right to inquire into the black box. The company has a right to keep its black box proprietary from its competitors. But if they turn over too much information to the city in the U.S., all that then can be requested by the competitor because of public access laws. So we're going to have to kind of find a way that the government tells broadly what the data sets are and how the algorithm is generally designed so that it can be tested a little bit. They might have an obligation to actually test some of the data, but eventually there's going to be a line there where the company won't participate. So it's a tension that's now being refereed without a lot of resolution. Let me take these two in. I think that the challenge here is the following. That every day a public employee exercises her discretion or his discretion. And that discretion is fixed by their own context. And that context has biases in it. I don't mean overtly racial biases, but there's biases in this. So if we force the documentation of every algorithm, will cause many governments not to use the algorithm, so just rely on today's discretion. But today's discretion is filled with biases as well. So what we need to do is think of a way to expose those biases. I mean, the best example in the U.S. today is there are a lot of young black men who were arrested for marijuana possession back in a time when there were a lot of arrests for marijuana possession. And if you score prior arrests in your predictions, your algorithmic predictions for future crimes, then you pull that forward. So it's just going to take a lot of thought about where the line should be. Sorry, if the questions were simpler, the answers would be shorter. I think the last two, and then we'll finish.
I was just wondering what advice you have for entrepreneurs when trying to identify cities or banks who are open to innovation.
Right. Yeah, this is a really good question. Yeah, so there are more mayors in the U.S. today than ever, I think, who take their jobs very professionally and are open to new ideas. Some cities have chief innovation officers or innovation delivery teams funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies. Others have, like Pittsburgh, very pronounced open data sites, and so you can kind of tell a little bit from that. You can follow the literature. I have a site at Harvard called Data Smart City Solutions, and we have a very broad inventory of hundreds of use cases, and you can kind of see which cities are really prevalent in that regard. So, those might be some clues. You might look, your question and other gentlemen's about procurement, you might look at which cities have a pilot project authority. But I mean, just before taking the last question, I mean, this is pretty obvious, but if you can solve their problem, they're more likely to take the risk of being innovative. If you have a product and it's not clear how it solves a problem, they may not be quite so eager to be risky. Yes?
You had an amazing slide about how data can create decision support systems, and I feel like with all the entrepreneurs in the Israeli community, we can make more and more systems very, very fast, very high level. But I feel like one of the gaps here is how do we get the police to share their data, the school
So I would advise two things. One, leave the police out of it. Right? When you start trying to get the police to cooperate, you'll be years trying to figure this out because their rules are much different, and there are some data they'll share. They'll take data, but that's just more difficult. In the U.S., the problem is not the technologists, it's the lawyers, right? Really. So I worked next to a really brilliant deputy mayor in New York, a woman named Wendy Gibbs, and she was creating a social service hub to better inform workers making child welfare and health intervention decisions. And every time, so she would convene these meetings, I would attend these meetings, and every time she had a group of agencies there, they would all bring their lawyers. And more often, she said, I understand the risk, I'm going to go forward, the more lawyers they would bring to tell her why they couldn't do it, right? And when Indiana, with what was Governor Pence, now Vice President Pence, began an effort to really first very deep data analytics effort in the U.S. to create a central agency for data analytics connected to performance management in state government, and he chose infant mortality as his first issue he wanted to take up. It took 7 months until he appointed a lawyer representing him to tell the other lawyers what information they should share who represented the agency. So my answer is, if you want to solve a big problem, the executive, agency director, commissioner, mayor, governor needs to assign a legal referee for the data sharing agreements, or you'll never get there. And so I would leave out the police and then cause somebody at the very top to take the lead without the because otherwise you just. So I mean, there are real issues, right? There are equity issues, there are bias issues, there are privacy issues. I mean, every one of these. I mean, it's silly to assume that the power that's in the room today doesn't also have a kind of a flip side to it. Each one of these solutions has a kind of a question to it. But if we're sensitive to those issues and we're transparent about those issues, we can help a lot more folks than the current system allows, and that's what's exciting to me. Thank you very much for your time.